I object, but my colleague from Illinois is not wrong. And I think after I get through explaining my objection, hopefully there'll be something we can work out. The U.S. should be engaging more in global efforts to find treatments and vaccines for coronavirus. Governments, academic institutions, scientists, researchers across the world are racing to do it. The U.S. must work at home and with international partners to develop treatments and vaccines. There is no reason we can't be doing something on our own and working with others across the world. This is a joint venture if there ever has been one. However, the non-binding resolution that my colleague has offered is not an actual solution. I come from the world, and one of the frustrations of being here for just a year and a half is that we don't get more stuff across the finish line. I have a real solution to ensure Americans benefit from the vaccine and treatment development efforts happening across the world. My bill, the ADAPT Act, Senate Bill 658, as amended, would create an expedited, almost automatic approval process at the FDA for vaccines and treatments that might occur across the world. We do not have the market cornered on good ideas. These countries have all developed regulatory systems that are compatible and that should make us feel comfortable. But instead of just talking about it, which we do so much of here, this bill would actually establish the approval reciprocity for treatments and vaccines between the FDA and other trusted counterparts. If one of them approves a vaccine or treatment, they are quickly, almost automatically approved here in the U.S. with my bill. We cannot afford miscommunication or bureaucratic foot-dragging with something so important. My bill ensures that regulators will work proactively to get Americans a vaccine as soon as possible. Look at the early testing missteps we did have with the CDC. I mentioned that in the briefing last Tuesday. Their overly prescriptive approach delayed our testing capability for the first 40 days. And the result has been a one-size-fits-all approach of locking down the economy, which I think we'll see some of the disadvantages of that over the next few months. When my staff talked to the FDA about working with international partners on treatment and vaccine development, the FDA assured them that they have everything under control and are speaking with their international counterparts. The FDA assured my staff that they have covered the issues that might come into play when you are having a partnership with somebody else. FDA is promoting the idea and having the doors open for developers to submit data and to seek approval for treatments and vaccines. Until we have a vaccine, reopening will be gradual. We need herd immunity and vaccines to be the final solution to this saga we're going through. But we cannot afford bureaucratic obstacles slowing down regulatory approvals for a successful vaccine. As we have seen, certain steps of vaccine development can be achieved at warp speed to cut down on development time, but regulatory approvals will not be one of them unless we take legislative action. The ADAPT Act is real action, not just talk, specifically designed for times like this, when scientists across the world are racing to develop treatments and vaccines. Therefore, with my prior objection, I do not want to leave my friend from Illinois empty-handed, and hoping my colleague from Illinois will not object. Madam President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Help Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-658 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, I further ask that the Braun substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to, the bill as amended be considered, read a third time, and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object. Madam President.
The Assistant Democratic Leader.
First, let me say to my friend and colleague from Idaho, thank you. The tone of your remarks was positive, constructive, bipartisan. That's exactly what the American people are looking for, at least in Illinois, and I'll bet you in Idaho as well. This national emergency, this public health crisis, should bring out the best in us, not the most political side of our nature. And thank you, because I think your remarks were offered in that respect. We've been here now 3 weeks. This is the third week since returning from a break where most of us were at home. I think this is the longest period of debate on the coronavirus that we've witnessed on the floor of the Senate in 3 weeks. I thought this 3-week period would be all about COVID-19, all about the vaccine. It hasn't. We've taken up many other things that had nothing to do with it. But what we've talked about here this morning is encouraging to me. And if bringing this resolution up with unanimous consent request is going to lead to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and other committees really moving forward on the important policy questions that you raised, and I hope I raised as well, then it was not time wasted. It was time well spent. And we do agree on so much more than we disagree. I'm sure of it when it comes to this. So I invite you, I encourage you, I beg you, as soon as we return from next week's recess, the sooner we can bring a hearing before your committee and others, the better. I'd like to address my colleague from Indiana's unanimous consent request as well. It's been my good fortune in the House and the Senate to work with the Food and Drug Administration. It is probably one of the most underrated agencies of our federal government. They make decisions, literally life and death decisions, every single day on things that were unimaginable to us. It's hard to look at all of the things they regulate and inspect and not be impressed. I've been impressed over the years with the Food and Drug Administration. But the gold standard of the Food and Drug Administration, which was established at least 60 years ago with the thalidomide scandal, was that this agency was to take a look at drugs that were about to go on the market in America and conduct tests, ask questions, do their own research to determine two things. Are they safe and are they effective? Safe and effective, that's it. But it's a lot. And so over the years, for 60 years or more, they have used this standard to judge drugs, clinical trials, which carefully measure the impact of a drug on the human body over a period of time and the like. It is frustrating because at times it takes longer than we'd wished. There are exceptions that have been created at the Food and Drug Administration for extraordinary circumstances where they can accelerate the process. But by and large, they have to judge drugs as safe and effective. Today, nearly 3/4 of drugs are approved in the United States by the Food and Drug Administration before they're approved in any other country around the world. The FDA is considered the gold standard. I've been told that so many times. And many countries looked to the Food and Drug Administration in the United States to see if they approved of a drug as being safe and effective before they move forward. This demonstrates that the Food and Drug Administration has an awesome responsibility, but is doing a good job in ensuring Americans have timely access to the same drugs as patients in other countries. The ADAPT Act, which Senator Braun brings to the floor, is a solution, I believe, in search of a problem. And sadly, it runs a real risk. This notion that we are somehow going to open up the possibility of a drug approved in another country being approved in the United States quickly or without any review, I think is a dangerous thing to do. To date, we know what the coronavirus has done to us, and we also know that this bill would completely change how drugs are approved for sale in the United States of America. It is not a minor bill, it is a major change. Under current law, if a pharmaceutical company wants to sell a drug, it needs the approval of the FDA. They look to test it and to be sure that it's safe and effective. It is the gold standard. Your proposal would abolish this method. That is significant. Instead, your proposal says that if a drug has been approved by another developed country, I'm not sure your definition of a developed country, but if approved by another developed country, it can bypass standard U.S. regulation and come to market without going through the Food and Drug Administration study, review, and approval. It is worth noting that many members of the House and Senate have criticized the pharmaceutical industry for charging Americans the highest drug prices in the world. I've been in that chorus from time to time, and suggested that drug prices in the United States should be the same as they are in Canada and Europe for the same drugs. Many times people on your side of the aisle have resisted that suggestion. They called it socialism and said we shouldn't let other countries dictate what America has to pay for drugs. But now, apparently, Senator Braun is comfortable letting other countries dictate whether our drugs are safe and effective. This bill is not a targeted response to coronavirus. It's an open-ended giveaway to some pharmaceutical operations, and more importantly, it is putting our safety at risk in America, which we never, ever want to do. Instead of approving a resolution that I introduced that simply expresses support for global coordination, Senator Braun wants to completely overturn our nation's drug approval process. This bill was introduced more than a year ago. It is still in search of a co-sponsor, and it hasn't been considered by the Republican Health Committee, which oversees the FDA. Now is the time for the best and brightest from all nations to work together toward a shared goal of ending this pandemic and finding a safe and effective vaccine. It is not the time to completely upend our nation's drug approval process, making it easy for some countries to flood our market with unsafe and ineffective drugs. For these reasons, I object to Senator Braun's counterproposal.
Madam President.
The objection is heard for both unanimous consent requests. The senator from Indiana is recognized.
So, in maybe a rare moment of some collegiality on the idea in general, I think the American public, and especially myself as one that watched this place operate for so many years leading up to the point where I ran for Senate, I accept the kind of guidance that there may need to be more fleshed out. You objected to it. But I think the American public deserves action out of this place. And so often it seems we dawdle and do not get to the point. Looking how long it took the body to come to agreement on criminal justice reform. And when I asked one of the first questions when I got here, I said, how long had you been working on it? 10 to 12 years. When you look at what we do get accomplished here, I think we need to figure out how we become more effective, we get things done more quickly, and how we pay for it in the long run. So I'm going to savor the moment we have here. We're at least talking about it, and hopefully be able to work with my neighbor from Illinois to still push the idea that this is a critical time and that we need to get something done. I yield the floor.